Good morning and welcome to today's webinar. In a week where Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey told his team that they could work from home forever, we're delighted to welcome the team from Vocon to talk about COVID-19 recovery, reimagining workplaces, and workplace strategy. Before we get started, I'd like to take a moment to go over a few housekeeping items. My name is Shabani and I'm the webinar organizer for today. We are recording today's event and we'll share it with you post-call. All your phone lines have been muted, and we want to make sure that today's presentation is extremely valuable for you. So we ask that you submit all questions by clicking and typing your question there. Now, please join me in welcoming Debbie Donnelly and Megan Spinos from Vocon. As Vocon's founding principal, Debbie Donnelly's leadership has expanded Vocon to include 200 plus professional workplace strategists, designers, architects, graphics and branding specialists, and technical support personnel with offices in Cleveland, New York City, and Los Angeles. Debbie's passionate about the impact that architecture and design can have on people, organizations, and overall culture. She is passionate about maintaining a culture of excellence, an environment where people have permission to be creative and fulfill their personal and professional dreams. Vocon is a 15-time recipient of being named one of Cleveland's best places to work by North Coast 99, which is a true testament to the success of Vocon's culture. As head of Vocon's strategic consulting practice, Megan helps organizations make decisions about the design and use of their workspace to support their culture and business goals, such as improved productivity, employee attraction and engagement, innovation to increase market share, and real estate portfolio optimization. Megan and her team are experts at understanding the impact space has on an individual's work performance. By studying how people work and use space, blended with their academic and industry knowledge, she and her team develop strategies that influence employee achievement, collaboration, and well-being in positive and measurable ways. So with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Deb Donnelly. Deb.
Hi, everybody. Happy week 9, day 4. It's kind of amazing. I think it's hard to imagine that we're in this moment together. We were actually talking to a CEO yesterday, and I said the same thing to him. And I said, "So how are you doing?" He said, "When is this going to end?" And he said, "Deb, didn't you see the news this morning? Tomorrow at noon." And I kind of laughed, and it was nice to hear the CEO of Fortune 200 company with such a bullish kind of attitude, because there are lots, despite what you see sometimes on the news, there are a lot of people that are very positive and people feeling that we're going to move through this event despite what you continue to read. So I know when I wake up every morning, I like to think about what the world will look like when we're through this moment. And I think week 2, I read something that McKinsey, I tend to read the McKinsey daily reports, and one of the reports said, imagine what your industry will look like after this moment. And so that was what inspired Megan and I to start the playbook that we're going to take you through, that we have been writing, and we update virtually every day. We have a team at Vocon that meets with clients. On average, we meet with 3 to 4 clients a day, and with their input and through their lens, with some of the finest even healthcare providers, we're so lucky to be in Cleveland, and through their lens, we update this playbook really every day at 5 o'clock, because it is through their lens that we become smarter and wiser about what the world is doing and will do in this moment. What I will say is no one really knows what the future holds. So we are looking at this as a phased approach. Those that say we're going to do this or that, I would say be leery of those people. I feel like we are in a moment where being prudent, practical, and looking at this through the lens of a phased approach is the way we are advising clients. And in this moment, we are trying to partner deeply with the healthcare providers and really give very, very practical advice. And that's where I think we have thrived, both here in Cleveland and with our global customers. So with that, I always love this slide. We cannot predict the future, but we can certainly prepare for it. And together in the ecosystem that many of us live in together, I've looked at the list of attendees for this, and we are all friends, particularly in this moment. For those of you that know Vocon and that know particularly Megan and I, we tend to be friends and create deep relationships across the city and across the world, really. And this is no time to sort of have institutional knowledge. It's a time to have shared knowledge. So anybody that wants to reach out and share what they're finding, we're really open to that, because learning from each other is what we are doing all the time. So we encourage your questions, we encourage your insights. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Megan and let's have a conversation. So thanks for joining today, guys.
Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, thanks so much for joining. Deb kind of laid the groundwork of what we've been up to for the last 10 weeks. And we've been really fortunate to have a group that collaborates across our 3 offices to really put our heads together about what the future holds. So today we're going to take you through some insights that we've gathered, share our perspective, share our point of view. It's been important for us to have a really strong point of view here to help our clients and our friends, guide them through what is really, if you've heard it once, you've heard it 1,000 times, an unprecedented moment for us. So just to kind of kick off, really, one of the questions that we get asked really often is how, like Deb's conversation with CEO yesterday, how long is this going to last? Obviously, we are looking to the numbers, we're looking to the medical and the scientific community to help guide us through where that curve is. But when it comes to bringing businesses back online, you know, we see this in kind of these 4 distinct phases. And I will say that all of the information here is informed by not only our research that we've done, our collaborative knowledge of our teams across these our locations, but also the daily conversations that we have, because we really think it's very important to be out there with our clients, with our partners, thinking, talking, listening, and really investigating what's afoot here, because nobody has it really totally figured out. So this first really phase of things is what we're working in now. I mean, we're starting to have these stay-at-home orders start to be restricted or lifted. Sorry. So really, it's that 12-week. What's going to happen in the first 12 weeks? Our company as well as others, getting our businesses back, talking about how do we start to bring back our employees in a really safe and measured way. We have heard the phrase the new abnormal for the next 6 to 12 months, where we're really thinking about some of those great things that happened in the last 10 weeks or so that are going to make their way back into the workplace on a permanent basis. A lot of testing, figuring out, trial and error over the next 6 months to a year. The new normal starts to come in about a year out, where we may have some projects that have been really put on hold start to come back online. And we're thinking about planning in a different way. You know, do we really need to have a real dense urban office, or can we think about a distributed model? All different types of real estate opportunities that might be coming forward. And then really looking about 2 years out, we're thinking that is really where those permanent portfolios start to take shape. By this time we have a vaccine. By this time we know so much more. We also know that the next pandemic is right around the corner, and we have the ability to retract and make those measures as we need to. But really we're looking between now and the next 2 years of what's going to shape us. One thing that we've kind of made the analogy to is how much our world changed after 9/11. We were not living under security and surveillance as much as we were prior to that. We really think that the next decade is about public health and about healthy and safe workspaces. And so that's what's going to start to inform and start to take shape as the basis of our planning. So how we want to kind of go through this is we really want to share with you the contents and the research that we've done. We want to look at kind of a building approach, landlord, which we call landlord approach, or building owner approach, and then really a tenant approach. What can each of us do as we start to bring our businesses back online? What practical measures can we take? So we're going to be really kind of clear there. We're going to keep it real high level, but share as much information as we can. So for us,
I think one of the things that we've really impressed upon people and learned, because we do a lot of work with landlords and tenants, that one of the big takeaways in this moment is the importance of landlords working together with tenants, because in this moment, if you think about the importance of how you come back to work, it really begins in the parking garage. It begins at the front door. It begins by reducing fear of your employees from the moment they leave their home. So if the relationship between tenant and landlord is not intact, which in a lot of cases it hasn't been. When you sign the lease, you walk away, you don't hear from each other too often. That conversation about shared restrooms and tenant corridors and building lobbies, we're really trying in this moment to bring people together, and that's what this deck begins to talk about. So sorry, Megan.
Nope, that's perfect. So we've seen this shift, in work over the last 10 weeks, if not a little bit before. So where we were able to collaborate, the story was around collaboration for workplaces and what they're meant to do and help support. And now everything is coordinated. We have to kind of go block by block during our day and really think about group coordination. Up until the very moment that I think we were put on pause, we had been talking about density. We've been talking about these key metrics that drive a lot of our space planning and how we think about space. And that has been replaced with this strategic distribution of people. We have to be very mindful of who is in the space and when, because of those physical distancing requirements. So everything has to be thoughtful ahead of time. Where we were having social interaction, and we looked at the workplace as a really great way to bring people together, because those social bonds are what's so important to forming culture and digging in deep with an organization. Everything's structured again. We are having Zoom happy hours and really having to think very carefully about how we connect to each other and to our culture. Where we had kind of a free form approach to shared space, open areas, amenities, all those kinds of things, we're now thinking of it in a reservable way. Again, the predictability of knowing who is where at what time. Workplace experience. Our team focuses a lot on the workplace experience as a driver, also for the reason we have a workplace. We're now programming that in a much different way, as well as employee mobility. I'm a mobile worker at our office, and I kind of come and go as I need to, depending on my day and my schedule. We're now working in employee work shifts. We have a shift A and a shift B vernacular. That's us. You all are maybe thinking about different ways to bring your people back in a different way. But now we have to be very prescriptive and thoughtful about who should be in the office when with each other, always being mindful of our social distancing, physical distancing. So I want to take you through the results of a survey that we've been running with our clients over the last 10 weeks. Really, our early thoughts were, there's a moment in time here. It's a really finite time that we can go back to our thousands of, participants and ask the question, how has your work experience gone so far? Thinking of the words on the left, were you productive? Did you have the tools that you need? Were you engaged to your culture? We learned so much from people in this moment. But always looking forward to the future. And the items on the right are really, what are your expectations about coming back to the work environment? Are you afraid? What are you concerned about when you come back to work? What are your expectations of your employer when you do return to work? And what, confidence, do you have the confidence in your team to really bring you back? The answers to those questions are so critical to an organization to be able to know what is really in the hearts and minds of their employees as they come back, but also looking in kind of a silver lining here always, what worked well? What worked really well during this experiment that we can start to take forward? Because, we're going to learn a lot from this, certainly this experience. So these were the questions. We now have over about 3,300 responses. We're starting to wrap it up. Over 30 organizations have been interested in participating with us. So the questions that we asked around the current work from home experience is, how has your productivity been? How was your overall experience with technology? Do you feel connected to your company during this time? That's a tough one because we've been so physically distant from each other. And then we asked, do you feel connected to your coworkers? Because that's what builds culture, is our connection to our coworkers. We asked what challenges you faced during this time. We asked what were your advantages? What were the advantages of working from home? Things that you could look at as a positive. And then we kept it really simple on the return back to work. What are your biggest concerns? And then in your own words, what were your expectations of your employer? And so what we did was we were able to look at the data individually within each organization. And now what we're bringing to you today is the look cumulatively. Obviously, we have a lot of them still in flight, but cumulatively for what we've started to discover. So when it came to productivity, you can see here over 90% felt that they've been really productive, and that's been a big story of this experience. People have felt more in control of their day. They felt that they've had a little bit of flexibility to start and stop, even though it seems like the days are pretty packed because they're kind of back to back with how we're scheduling things, and we have to be very prescriptive about that. The productivity was definitely there. We did kind of sort through generationally and within level of the organization. And I would say anecdotally, those are very, very close. There weren't a lot of huge disparities. When it came to productivity, we did see some kind of inching down of an individual contributor, which was the majority of our respondents. Obviously, over the 2/3 of our respondents were an individual contributor. So we're paying note to that. And in terms of technology, we asked, how was your technology experience? What we found working with our clients, some were really prepared, some were not really prepared. For us as an organization, Vocon had adopted Teams over a year ago. So we had been slowly migrating to the Teams platform. We knew how to be dangerous, so to speak, but it really worked itself into our practice heavily over that time. So those scores there on the right about it being a good or excellent experience was really positive. Organizations really took shape, started to really work their digital workplace experience, which is a really positive thing. If we were to notice any nuances, we saw that generationally, the younger generations the technology experience was good, if not excellent. Where we really saw higher marks were in the boomer generation. And in conversations to back that up and to follow up with that, what we started to believe and start to understand is that the younger generations really this was very second nature to them. So it was just sort of business as usual, where the older generation had a little bit of a learning curve, but thought it was really positive. So there was a bigger jump there, which kind of contributed to some of those scores. So then we asked your connection to your culture. And so we saw that most organizations are doing fairly well. People still felt connected, attribute to the daily, weekly check-ins, the effort of the organization to keep their people connected. But we saw a little bit of a drop when it came to your connection to your coworkers. That was a little bit further down the line, and understandable, not to be blamed. It's just the situation that we're in. We're not together, and it is hard to maintain those social connections when you're not physically in the.
I think I think this is actually one of the most important parts of the survey, though, and one of the reasons we jumped off with the survey is because as you see Twitter going to 100% remote working through the end of the year, and JP Morgan Chase also dabbling in sort of a close to 100% remote to the end of the year, you wonder what the impact to culture is really going to be as you begin to look at commoditizing some of these institutions and these businesses. And so that's one we're really watching on the right side, because we always say culture eats strategy for lunch. And so the curve on that and how quickly that reduction in culture begins to really eat away at a company is something to watch. PwC is a huge client of ours, and we had a call with them yesterday. They're going to be one of the first to start to innovate a whole new way of working, which we're super excited about. And it's because it's the right thing to do, not because of COVID. And so that'll be really, really interesting to see how they integrate the work from home kind of policy and platform into their work, but it will not be at the cost of culture. And I think we have to be really, really, really careful in this moment to not overplay the work from home, the simplicity of what could be perceived as a really quick reduction in portfolio, because we also have a slide in here that says you have to be really careful with that metric. And I think that balance is going to be really important to how we look at this whole situation over that abnormal kind of that this next 6 to 12 months. And so I think the really smart organizations, and a lot of our clients are really looking at this in a smart way, are really, again, pumping the brakes, not to overcorrect, but they're really being patient around analyzing the data before making decisions. And that's why we're doing this survey. But best to ask while people are at home, how's it going? Because as you get to some of the comments in the survey, the childcare situation with that generation who has children at home is really becoming problematic. And I think that whole situation begins to affect productivity. So asking in this survey was really, really important, I think. So culture is a really big piece of this puzzle.
Yeah. I wanted to go back, just you reminded me of one point in the survey, Deb, around productivity as it relates to childcare. So we saw, again, level and a little bit of generation, some dips in, I started to mention the generational thing, but also in level and productivity. And we, again, investigating, reading the comments, started to attribute some of that to the role that many of those in that demographic were playing, as well as worker, homeschool, caretaker, all around stresses that are being placed on individuals. So while we see productivity as reported as being better, there were some undertones there of stress that is practical. And, you know, with schools not being open, with childcare and also elder care and all those other concerns that are happening that we have to be paying very much attention to, as Deb started to mention. So what were the challenges working from home? Paid a lot of attention to this. So this was the top 5. General anxiety of the impact of COVID, just stress in general around COVID. Very nervous people were about this, as we all have been. Social isolation from family and friends has been really tough. Being away from coworkers also challenges on their minds. Communicating and sharing information with coworkers was also not as easy. Obviously, we saw high marks for productivity, we saw high marks for technology, but still the ability to share freely within a communal working environment was better. And so people were saying, you know, this is still a bit of a challenge. And then it's really tough to maintain a regular work schedule. I know myself, my days are off. We always joke as we get on calls, what day is today? And, you know, oh, we're starting week 10. It was a hard balance. It's just not that we recreated the work environment at home. It came with a whole set of different parameters. But the advantages to working from home. So this is the list that we are looking at very seriously, because they can be treated as kind of the new nuances for what could be taken into the future work environment. No travel commute, people really appreciated that. It's important to note, and you may ask it in the comments, yes, we asked a lot of New Yorkers questions, we asked Los Angelinos questions, we asked Midwest, we were all over the country with our 3,300 responses, but no matter what market you were in, the commute was a part of that. Flexible work schedule, increased productivity. Those are the two that our team is looking at and saying, those are the nuances. You know, as we come back to a work environment, we're probably going to have to commute at some point. But what's there that can be brought in on a permanent basis? Is it greater flexibility and choice for someone while still kind of maintaining this kind of hybrid work from home experience with an office experience or with a workplace experience? Productivity. People were feeling that they had more productivity. What's under there that can be taken forward? How do we structure our work environments to encourage that? How do we provide people with a little bit more balance in their day-to-day lives so that they can have that what was working really well kind of continue? The last two were really to spend more time with family and fewer distractions for sure. So one of the biggest questions we asked, obviously, which I know a lot of you are curious about, is what are people worried about as they go back to work? And what are their biggest concerns about making that transition back to the workplace? So we gave people response options. It's important in a survey environment that you don't just kind of let all those answers kind of free form, because we'd have to collaborate or collect them and figure it out what they were meaning. But we looked really broadly at this. We cross-checked our survey with a lot of other insights and research. And so kind of highlighted over here on the left, and you can see these were the top answers. Number one was that making sure I stay healthy and I don't contract COVID. 82% of our respondents overall put that as number one. People were really worried about the hygiene etiquette of my coworkers. I know that I've screened myself, but I'm not really trusting that my coworkers screen themselves before coming to work, or I'm not sure that they washed their hands, and I'm not sure that they're wearing a mask and all those kinds of things. We asked the question about keeping a safe distance from one another in a couple of different ways. We asked about the individual workspace, we asked about conference rooms, we asked about cafes and break spaces, and then we asked about while navigating the workplace in general. And the reason we didn't just keep it at the top level, like I'm just concerned about keeping a safe distance, was because we needed to get a little deeper so that if we needed to help organizations react and respond, you knew exactly where employees were in that moment. So the number one that came up again and again, I'm just worried about keeping a safe distance from others in general. That's just, general physical distancing. Then the second was really about in my workstation. So it's really navigating my corridors, navigating my workspace, and then my own workstation, my own private office, my own, whatever you want to call it. And then the last one was really the fifth one. We didn't put all of them ranking here, but we put the top 5. I'm concerned about the cleanliness of the office and keeping a safe distance from others in shared spaces like conference rooms. So information like this helps us, so we did the survey on ourselves as well, helped us know where to target, helped us know what to focus on, and be responsive to our employee population. And so we mentioned that we had asked kind of an open-ended question. So every organization that responded had hundreds of responses. So we pulled just a couple here about what really was in the minds of people. We encouraged our companies that had participated in this to really read through those comments, because it's an opportunity for employees to talk to their employer in a safe and anonymous way. And people were really, really thoughtful. They had talked about the need for continued communication. They'd expressed that they'd been really successful and productive at home and that they were able to focus more. What takeaways could we have from that? They said that they were really worried that we practice social distancing, that there's sanitizing stations in the office, and that the building is kept really clean. A lot of times people would say, I really want us to be pragmatic about coming back to the office. Please don't rush us back. Give us a little room to accommodate this. The one thing that we found over and over is that people's emotions and feelings about this are really across a spectrum. And so organizations are really being very fair and thoughtful about, I can't overestimate someone's discomfort or comfort with coming back to the office, so we really need to act pragmatically in this moment. Don't force people to return if they aren't comfortable to. That's what a lot of people were asking. And again, an emphasis on, I was twice as productive, less distracted. I know we need to be back in the office for our business continuity, but let's just think through this because there's some things that are really working well. So we wanted to talk through at this point, really, how can, as Deb said, starts at the parking garage, starts at the very front door. I'm going to kind of go through this at a high level, but these are kind of bits of advice and bits of, I'll go back right here, kind of priorities that we're looking at as it relates to the building. So many of you may even own your own building, so think of yourselves as both a landlord and a tenant, but we're really talking about what's happening on the ground floor as an employee starts to enter the building, what's going on those tenant corridors as you get further up into their own spaces. Really, what can we do from a washroom perspective, because it is so important as a central point of sanitation in a building. Thinking about amenities, thinking about building performance and stakeholder communication. So that ground floor optionality, what we're really looking to do here is to help organizations kind of control the congestion when we walk into that building. Think of the biggest building that you've ever been in and how many people were in that building at one time. Think of how we have to now navigate bringing people back in a very systemic way. So building owners are really thinking through this and should be a piece of this very important conversation. Number 2 is really about thinking about retail spaces, if there are retail spaces or other spaces, to convert to mudroom. You think of a mudroom in your own home as a place to drop your things, possibly wash hands, as a dumping ground for the moments that are coming in before you go into your home. We're thinking of that with our buildings in another way, of a place of refresh. At Vocon, we're going to be required to wash our hands. That's our protocol every time we enter the building. And thinking about, okay, so are there personal effects that I can leave in a locker because it's helpful to do so? I'm not bringing all of that up into my own workspace. Opening up stair connections to alleviate elevator congestion. We're going to have much more restrictions on the occupancy of elevators. As you'll kind of see in number 6, we're going to monitor that density for open and larger freight elevators for tenants. So thinking about what's the off-ramp. If you can't use the elevator, how are we thinking about space? Touchless security at desks and turnstiles. So we've been working with some technology partners to really think through what is that seamless flow of someone into a building. Lots of organizations already have kind of the badge swipe that just clears the way for you, and that's certainly great. But even moving kind of beyond that, facial recognition, boarding pass kind of ID on your phone that you can scan, anything to really preserve security, which is always important, but also have that seamless experience as you're walking through a space. And then something that we are going to see a lot of, and we're even converting our own areas like this, we've heard of contactless drop off. So I can buy a pizza and a vehicle without actually talking to anybody, or actually not talking to anybody, but coming into contact. Those ground zero central locations inside of a building where food is going to be dropped off. We're doing that ourselves, our samples, our products, our mail, our packages, a neutral zone that can be monitored with UV light and sanitized on a regular basis to kind of limit the contact with others. Thinking about how those things...
At the end of the day, the entire way things are coming in and out of a building is completely shifting. And I think being part of that whole ecosystem and the shift in the ecosystem through the lens really of the landlord and the tenant is really an exciting opportunity. And we just jumped in with both feet, which has been really awesome to see some of the largest landlords really in the country partnering with the enterprise clients and really coming together in this moment and saying, okay, we need to sit at the same side of the table and work through this and get through it in a really, really, really prolific way. I've been in this business for 33 years and I've really never seen this type of really authentic and genuine partnership. So it's really kind of cool. We can kind of go through these quickly because if you guys have questions, we could certainly get into them more specifically, but obviously the restrooms have to change and the corridors have to shift, but Megan, if you want to.
Yeah. So real quickly, kind of the things that a lot of your businesses might be doing already is really thinking about the bathrooms, that hands-free push and pull door plate hardware. A lot of organizations had the hands-free faucets and toilets before, but really retrofitting those to make sure that they're all that way. We're seeing a lot more day cleaning. We were working with a client who was partnering with a very prominent medical entity that was giving advice and had said, you know what, you really should be thinking about 3 times a day. You should be thinking about as you start the day, the middle of the day, and the end of the day. Whether someone is cleaning or you're cleaning, we're going to go to an every 4-hour cleaning protocol in our office. But that really picking up will do a lot to help mitigate the spread of germs. And then having more of a personal approach to grab and go cleaning supplies for employees inside the restrooms. Here, we're really thinking about amenities. Amenities take up an enormous amount of space in a building. So rather than, as Deb kind of mentioned, doing this broad overreach, what are those interventions that we could help organizations and building owners make in the short term to really think about a much safer experience? We had talked about that pre-check-in for visitors. We really talked about, getting through a building really seamlessly. That pre-check so that we're not passing back and forth the IDs and all of this stuff is an opportunity there. We talked about multi-purpose spaces that have been reprogrammed, looking at materiality around lounge seating, not just bleach, cleanable, and antimicrobial, but just thinking through the protocols around that. Mentioned elevators that are dedicated to amenity floors, just being thoughtful about who's moving through the space and when. Number 5 is important for us because we know that probably now, definitely now and into the future, we're going to have a certain contingent of the workforce at home, at somewhere else, not in the workplace. And we really need to think of them as full participants in the workplace experience. And so we're going to be working with this hybrid of I have a virtual participant and I have a physical participant. And so we really need the technology to connect them and also the mindset that we might not have full front and center participation in a physical meeting in person all the time. We're talking about a serviced approach to food. You're not going to see a salad bar for probably a bit of time. Coffee service that is provided to you instead of you being able to kind of customize your options. Think of serviced amenities a bit more in the future as we get through. And then kind of definitely those cleansing stations in high traffic areas, but really thinking about the density of collaborative spaces for ourselves. We've physically taken chairs out of the conference room that comply with a physical distancing requirement, but also just no chance of over occupying for the short term. So then really, we wanted to, again, this is kind of our last piece here, wanted to get into what can tenants do? What can the owners do with regard to those healthy and safe workplace guidelines? So as we've gone through, as Deb mentioned, every day at 5 o'clock, we kind of cross-check this list and what did we learn new and what are we thinking of? But I mentioned number one, the remote check-in, thinking about that in a much different way. Number two, I did mention previously as well, that seamless hardware experience, facial recognition, scanning, all those other types of clearances that can help those doors open for me because I'm secured, I'm cleared. Maybe I've had a health screening and that's been attached to it. That's the next frontier, but thinking about getting through the space in a very straightforward way. We've been partnering with Gojo, based in Akron, to think about putting refresh zones throughout the workplace in a more thoughtful way. Just having a hand pump of sanitizer of Purell or a wipe on a countertop, we want to put predictive, architecturally smart, aesthetically pleasing items in place so that people remember to use them, think about using them in a better way. On the short term, long term, we can talk about replumbing and retrofitting some of those things, but really making that part of the predictive habit of people. I mentioned those increase of virtual opportunities, really making sure that your digital workplace is as integrated with your physical workplace as possible. 5 and 11, I'm making you kind of split screens and jump across, is part of our planning that we're doing to reduce density in those work zones. And that's really taking those, pardon me, government and health guidelines of 6-foot distance, and maybe for us a little bit more so for some comfort, and reducing that density in those work zones and that shared spaces. 6 is about thinking about who's coming into your space and when, and just being very pragmatic. So for example, for us, for the month of May, we're going to limit visitor contact. We have a lot of people that come to our office on a daily basis, and we're really thinking about all of that. As we're just trying to get our employees back in a very concentrated way, and we need to take care of them first. We're going to think about kind of the access of everyone else in a second or two. 7 is about population management, and that's those employee work shifts that really start to drive, who's here and when, and how you work through that. 8, streamlining those surfaces, thinking about materiality and really not so much flat surface that can attract those things. I kind of mentioned 9 and 10 with regard to food service and thinking about that in a different way, limiting really the access to everything and much more prepared foods. And then 10 or 12, I should say, really important to monitor air filtration. Our MEP partners, our HVAC partners really have a strong role to play here to ensure that we're getting fresh air intake as much as possible and we're using the highest quality filters as we can. So this is just a quick example of, day one, what does that start to look like? How do you take those items from the first, that first slide there just that I showed just now and start to implement that? What are those things that we could do to have our healthy and safe workplace come back online? What does that start to look like? And then what does a future plan start to embrace as we move forward? The plan for population management, this is just an example here of how a lot of organizations are thinking about this. We're really thinking that there's no more than 50% of the population in the office at any one time. That's the numbers that we're starting to come up with as we do these physical distancing plans. Consequently, the government guidelines are starting to kind of reflect that, state guidelines, certain occupancy levels as we move forward. So thinking, how are you integrating your virtual teams with your physical teams? How are the physical teams starting to navigate and all of that? We are workplace planners, so we're thinking about how does this affect staff in the short term as well as the long term. So you're seeing kind of a rejiggering here of the need for space. So the left side is really, what are those things that would drive down user demand for on site? Many of us are in the design field on this call, and we're probably in flight with a lot of projects, beautiful projects that are now complete, that are sitting empty, and it's not the way that we were intended. But as we start to bring people back in the short term, really, what is driving some of that occupancy? Did they reduce their headcount because of the need? Are work shifts kind of reducing the amount of people that are on site? Do you have a certain amount of that are just going to be, pardon me, permanently work from home, or work from home for a certain amount of time because their work supports that? All of that on the left-hand side starts to shape who really needs to be on site. The right-hand side starts to look at, in the short term, are we also thinking about how we're using shared spaces a little bit differently? Fewer meetings on site is what I kind of mentioned. Being more structured about our collaboration, thinking through how long our meetings are, how we're gathering, and then understanding that a certain portion of our population is going to be working from home while we're in the office, sort of all of those things together driving our collaborative seat demand. So one of our last slides here is really just kind of an example of what does that start to look like now as we start to lay this out. Now we've learned quite so much about our physical distancing. What does that start to look like on a plan? And you can see when you add your 6-foot distance in, like I said, we put a little bit more in there because there may be some architectural constraints that start to prevent you from having really solid execution of that at the pinch points. But this is what it starts to look like. That starts to define how many people you can have on site and then who you're going to have from there. So I'm just going to land on here for one.
If you go back to the plan, though, I think what's interesting and what's been really, I think when we started, I feel like the journey for a lot of our enterprise clients began with their EHS teams, and it really, this problem landed in that health and safety world. And so for a couple of weeks, our playbooks we were really having this discussion with EHS teams, and the real estate partners that we traditionally partner with were kind of in the background. And what they started to realize is that, yes, this is an EHS issue, but that it was much more complex than just grabbing chairs and putting them in the basement. And they started to realize that the problem really did kind of stem back to real estate. And so then I think week 4, we started to say, okay, our teams are emerging from the background. And so our team started to come forward and say, oh, wow, okay, let's gather the troops back and let's start to really look at our plans across the country. And it really became a much more complex problem because much of the portfolios that we look at are across the country, each with different work orders and back to work, much different guidelines across the country. And so what we're starting to see is people asking us to look at each geographic group and start to create plans like this that really kind of start to help their office management teams, provide them guidance as to what they need to do for this first burn-in period, whether it's the summer, so that their office management teams really have a guidepost of what to do and then how they can lay in their shifting. Because with this kind of plan, they know how many people they can bring back, whether it's if they're working off of a 50% return to work initially or 25%, whatever it is, these plans can start to reflect that as a guidepost. Because it really isn't just about taking chairs out of conference rooms. It's really about a thoughtful kind of look at what you're doing in this moment. And I just think getting step 1 right is really lends itself to the ultimate goal in this moment of reducing fear, because that's, in order to do this, all of our goals is to try and reduce fear of the people we work side by side with every day. And if we fail at that, I think we really failed at everything. So that's kind of been our goal, and that's been what we hear every day with our clients and our friends on the phone. And we have just tried to create a toolkit to help people. So I guess if you go to the final slide, we always kind of say, if you don't need to go into work, why would you? And I think at the end of the day, what we hear every day are the people miss human connection. A Zoom call, I don't know how you guys feel, but we're pretty much on overload. I'm kind of over the Zoom birthday parties, the Zoom happy hours. We miss human connections, and I will go back to the quote around culture eats strategy every day. And I think we will all return to that moment where the companies with culture will always be more successful than the companies that don't have it. So I will always believe in the workplace. We've been doing this for 33 years, and we know We are in a pivotal moment again, and we will continue to evolve the workplace to reflect the current situation, but safety will be the conversation, and we're going to continue to address it in a really thoughtful and authentic and genuine way. And we just look forward to learning and continuing to partner with really smart people, many of whom are on the phone. So we thank you guys for your time, and just wish everybody continued safety and well-being in this moment. Thanks, Shivani, for giving us the time.
Of course. We do have some questions coming in, but before I get to them, I just want to remind everyone that you can use the questions box on your panel to ask your questions. Okay, so we had a question come in. Are you receiving any requests from hospitality and restaurants or other retailers on retrofitting their space, and what are some of the guidelines you're offering them?
I think restaurants, clearly restaurants are really nervous because we definitely have gotten requests from restaurants, but it's their pro forma that's scary. I just got off the phone with David Gilbert. He's putting together a plan. They're launching in a week to try and help restaurants open safely. They're creating this really cool program in Cleveland around helping restaurants I don't want to use the word certified because that's the wrong word, but to say they're following these guidelines that deem them safe and ready to open. But the other side of that is, if they have to physically distance, does it make financial sense for them to open? Can they afford to open? And that's the question. So yes, we've received questions around that, and we can help them with those distancing plans. But when they start to do the economics of, does it make sense for them to do it? Those with patios, because the ones with patios may be able to make financial sense of opening. It's a hard one. But I'm hoping with David's doing, I received that made me very hopeful. Literally right before this call, I had not heard about what he's doing, but within the week, that's coming online in Cleveland, which I'm super excited about. So stay tuned for that. We're happy to help. We are happy to help anyone that needs help, but I don't know the financial part of the restaurant business that well,
We had another question. How are your clients embracing these types of changes with their workplace environments with regard to the added expense and budget management? So how are they balancing sort of the required work environments with the cost required to undertake those?
I'll speak initially and then Megan, you jump in, but I would say we are trying in this moment, Shivani, to not create a big money grab, because I feel like no one in this moment wants to spend money at this time. So we're really trying hard in this burn-in period to create strategies that don't require a lot of spend. Because I believe that until we understand what this really is, that we shouldn't be out there spending a lot of money until we understand what the new thing really is. Mm-hmm. So we're not suggesting that people go out and do anything permanent. We're suggesting that these initial plans seek to get people through this initial burn-in phase, and maybe this initial 6 months with like this very agile way of thinking, these interventions that are very practical. And then when we just establish what the new normal is, this new abnormal, then we begin to look at things that are much more permanent. What you'd hate to do is do something that you're spending money on that you will ultimately not use or have to toss away. Mm-hmm. I don't know, Megan, what would your thoughts be?
I agree fully. That's why we kind of had that curve on our chart of, you're going to see this kind of hyper response in the next 12 weeks to 6 months of this overreach, and we want to be really cautious of that. If you look at if you just looked at the plans that we've been developing, it's about business continuity that's been happening in some way over the last 10 weeks for so many organizations, and then starting to thin out the return to work. So that itself is not a huge expense. You know, thinking through the cost of making those plans, pulling those teams together to think through that. Lots and lots of companies have kind of this back to work task force, so to speak. Those are not, I mean, there's a cost to that, I'm sure, but they are not overly expensive to just even start to bring people back to the workplace and think about this in a very thoughtful way. Where it does get expensive, are you redoing furniture, and are you redoing, you know, wholesale changes to architecture and construction and technology? Not to just pigeonhole furniture, because they're a hugely important piece of this as we think forward, but just we're saying be just thoughtful in what works, what doesn't work, and don't overreact in this moment when we're really just trying to get people back to work safely.
Okay, we have more questions. 6-foot distancing and air management seems adequate, but others want to raise panel heights. This person is asking for what your thoughts are. You know, is that just fear-based, since air travels, you know, air doesn't care whether the panel is 6 feet or 10 feet. Just some thoughts on whether raising panel heights is worth it.
Do you want to?
I mean, people were saying, is this the return of the private office and the death of, like, you know, I just feel like we, again, pump the brakes. I feel like pump the brakes. You can't, I mean, there was one of our clients is like, we're about to place orders for plexiglass. And I'm like, oh my goodness, like, oh my gosh, like, you know, we just have to just pump the brakes a little bit, because I think the distancing plans that we're doing kind of accommodate for that, because the germs are going to go over really anything. So in our opinion, like, and I just feel like we just need to slow our roll a little bit, and just be a bit patient. As I do not think panel heights need to be raised at this moment. I think we need to be patient in this moment. Megan, you can go ahead.
I think, yeah, the distancing that we're advocating is a checkerboard approach. We're advocating really smart way of using that physical distancing that is meant to put that barrier between people using space. So that's the advice. That's what we're suggesting. You know, if those panels are still around in someone's, you know, storage, and the level of comfort, then that is certainly great. But it's the physical distancing that's the most important thing. And you'll see that from the CDC to every governor's recommendation is what's the real essence there. Then what do you do with that? So we're just being really cautious.
For all the furniture people on the phone, though, we are looking at to bring back the 120s. I mean, like, I don't know. I mean, those are showing up in a lot of our like, if you look at our 1 year out planning, I mean, those are coming. I'm seeing those a lot in our future. What we're showing to sort of some of the developers who are looking at future planning, I'm seeing those come back, which I think is kind of funny. It's kind of like everything has a life. It's like everything comes around, goes around,
Vintage.
but it's all vintage, right? So that I do think long term. Yeah.
We have a few more questions here. We had one person ask a question around, do you think moving ahead, the companies will be looking for less real estate because there's going to be more people working from home, or more real estate because of this need to maintain physical and social distance?
We actually have, it's funny, we had an intern whose background is in finance, so we built a model if anybody's interested in it. And there's probably going to be a reduction in square footage. I mean, we can show it to you, but it's not going to be as dramatic as people say. We built a formula that kind of demonstrates that, because there probably will be a little bit more with the distancing requirements, space that's required per person, but there's probably going to be a shift in people who work from home. I mean, because I think that this moment will prove that to people who were the naysayers, because there were a lot of naysayers in the C-suite that said this will never work. And I think this moment has demonstrated that it will. But I think that barrier, it probably, you've heard, oh my gosh, 50% of the population is going to work from home. I think that's an overreach. But we have this formula that you can kind of plug in. If 25% of your population works from home and you increase the square footage from 125 square feet per person to 180, what does that do to your overall footprint? And it's very interesting because it's not as much as you think overall. So I think there's going to be a modest decline in portfolios, though. I think people are looking for that. In the global heads of real estate are looking for that
Yeah.
shift. What do you think, Megan? That like across the board, that our gangs are looking for that.
And I think the thing they're thinking through is the right sizing. So there's a correction here that might be able to happen. And people thinking just much more pragmatically, more realistically about how they conduct their day, you know, wanting to always keep the workplace as an environment of choice and flexibility and agility. It's going to be more important than ever. And so I think you're going to see this sort of shimmying down in some cases, but it was probably for a very pragmatic, responsible purpose, not an overreach.
We have another question, and this, goes back to something you had talked about right at the beginning, Megan, around productivity and also being primary caregivers for children right now. And the question was around, there's a 50% chance that the K through 12 schools won't open for a while in Ohio, and maybe not even for the rest of the year, and just wanted to get your thoughts on how that would affect the workplace, sort of from the conversations that you're having with your clients.
That definitely comes into a key partnership of the human resources function within all of these conversations. When we start a project, just in general, pre-COVID, post-COVID, whatever, that the tech person, the HR, brand, communications, facilities, our core team is very tight because they all start to encompass the workplace experience, or all have some sort of input into the workplace experience. And those are some organizational challenges that or companies are addressing and dealing with universally. So again, it's bridging that gap between those that can't come back for whatever reason, and being really tied to your culture. That's kind of going back to Deb's point of a strong culture will help you navigate through a lot of these things. But definitely something that is a tough call, and HR teams and facility teams and health and safety teams are a very much a reality that we're going to have to address and think about long term, for sure.
We have another question, and I think this should be our last one since we're coming up on the hour. How do you think business leaders should be thinking about Facetime versus flexibility from a cultural standpoint in a post-COVID world?
We literally just talked about this morning. I think, Shivani, I think that at the end of the day, in a moment like this, it's easy to go too far to one place. And I think if we could just be measured and balanced in our approach, I think that's where we will end up. But let's just not go too far to one way, because I think you need both. I think we've learned that we can exist in this way, the way we're doing it now. But I really do think you need a combination of both. And so creating that opportunity to have the office environment setting and this ability to be flexible, I think is really the right solution. And I think we actually were heading in that direction before COVID. It's just not overcorrecting with the remote situation and thinking that this is sort of the silver bullet. I think that might be a dangerous slope, because culture it's really important. Mm-hmm. Moderation.
Isn't that everything?
But hard to do.
Thank you both again for this tremendous presentation. We've had so many comments about the value that you provided today. So thank you for sharing this great information.
Thanks, everybody.
With us. And thank you everyone for joining us. We hope you found today's presentation engaging and informative. If you have feedback, please share it with us. We have another presentation on the 19th, and Deb and Megan, you both talked about the importance of air quality, and our next presentation on the 19th focuses on air quality. It's part 2 of a series specifically on air quality. So if you're interested in that, you can go to our website and learn more. And we will be following up with this recording as well. And if you would like to speak with Megan or Deb directly, you can find them on the Vocon website, vocon.com, and we'll share their contact information as part of the follow-up as well. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Bye.
Stay safe. Bye, guys. Bye, Shivani. Bye, Megan.
Bye.
Shabani.
Bye,
Bye, Deb.
guys. Bye.